Hello, Simone. I'm excited to be here with you today. Today, we are going to be doing an analysis of the Star Trek universe, and we will be exploring, because this is something I long thought when I watched Star Trek stuff historically, and I've watched a lot of it. I had this feeling in the background, which is like, this seems very dystopian and dark to me. But because I could never watch it all or search it all without AI, I thought maybe there's some counter examples against this.
Yeah.
I decided to dig very deep today, and I am going to be bringing receipts that the Federation in the Star Trek universe is a militarist, fascist, mostly dictatorship. With they have an elected government, but it has virtually no real power. It's used. They have about the elected government in the Star Trek world has about as much power as the Queen has in Britain.
Wow.
Worse, it is a world where while they call it post-scarcity, there actually is not a single instance in all of Star Trek canon of a character that is not associated with the Federation military saying that the Federation is a post-scarcity society.
So if you're in the military, it feels post-scarcity.
Well, not it feels. If it's a military dictatorship, it's like in North Korea, where you ask somebody in the military, is North Korea a prosperous society? And somebody in the military is going to be like, North Korea's the most prosperous society. Everyone has 3 meals a day and they're happy as a clam.
Oh dear.
But we will go over that this military is not a meritocracy. It's incredibly nepotistic. We will go over instances that show that the military within the Star Trek universe is more nepotistic than literally any military on Earth today, except for some like African dictatorships. Like the degree, just to give you an example of what I mean here, we have an instance of a mother assigning a daughter to directly under her command on her ship. We are going to
be a decent number of Nepo babies in Star Trek. I thought it was
you have Wesley Crusher, who is allowed on the command deck despite having no formal training.
But we love him.
Then rush through Starfleet Academy when we know a Ferengi wasn't even allowed to apply without a separate. So it's a systematically racist system as well. In the latest season of Lower Deck, there was a really chilling episode in which a species had just been given replicators by the Federation, and they were celebrating what they called Post-Scarcity Day, where they were, and I kid you not, having all of their gold and jewels taken by the Federation because they wouldn't, quote-unquote, need them anymore. And the Federation used all of that stuff to all their currency as well, despite the fact that the Federation does use currency. And so then the Federation takes all this planet's gold and jewels and gives them to another species to fix a problem that they are having with them. And you can say, well, the Federation's original plan was to melt it down or destroy it. And I'm like, if that was the case, then why? Why was the planet forced to give all of this to the Federation? Why not put it in a museum or something? Why did the Federation take all of the planet's valuables? There is no explainable reason unless they were trying to prevent the planet from being able to trade with other species now that the planet was dependent on them for the means of production. And what is really like ghoulish about this is we see this planet celebrating like they're going to have free access to the replicators that were given to them. And yet we know the Federation maintains strict control of the replicators. So clearly the Federation has misled them. What this scene has strong vibes of is the Ashen from SG-1, which is this species that comes and offers Earth and other planets the opportunity to have longer lives, to stay young longer, to not get sick. But what they really do at the same time is sterilize them so that they can replace them and use their planets any way they see fit, which is what the Federation is doing here. By giving them replicators and getting rid of every other way that they can produce things, but by maintaining control of what can be produced and how much of it can be produced on the replicators, they have completely seized the means of production within this planet. And I would remind you, it is not the Federation civilian government that sees the means of production on the planet. It is their military, Starfleet, because it is Starfleet that controls who can use replicators for what and when. Apparently, they just didn't tell anyone on this planet that.
Do not underestimate what we offer. We can put an end to disease, double the human lifespan, provide the means to cross entire continents in a single step. We offer Earth membership within the Ashen Confederation.
if I'm right, these are newspapers.
By the way, Bourne, would you read this aloud for me? I couldn't quite translate it.
Of course. Sterility.
We knew what you were planning, Mullen. This just confirms it. Vaccine causes sterility. That was the headline. You wiped out most of the Volian population and turned their entire world into farmland. And do the same to Earth.
And we'll be contrasting it to the Ferengi, who are not racist in this way. And they'll be like, well, the Ferengi are sexist. And I'll be like, actually, we'll be challenging that as well. If you actually dig into what is canon within the world, the Federation is incredibly sexist. You have multiple instances of commanders forcing themselves on subordinates and facing no repercussions, forcing women within their crew to dress in skimpy outfits, and women disproportionately only really serving traditionally feminine roles, except in a few instances where they're commanders and they mostly F stuff up.
Ouch.
And then, as a cherry on the cake to all of this, and keep in mind, all of this is happening with a genetic underclass. The Federation has a genetic underclass where some people are born essentially illegal citizens.
Wait, who?
Anyone who has had any genetic alteration done to themselves or their ancestors. Sorry, this may not be obvious to people, but if you give somebody genetic modifications within one generation, those modifications will be inherited by their descendants. So it doesn't just make an underclass of the individual, but anyone who is born to that family. Which means that the only real solution to these individuals from the Federation's perspective is to forcibly sterilize them. I'd also note here, and I think it's very telling, that in very progressive coded shows like Star Trek, genetic enhancement and trying to make humans better is seen very negatively. The obsession with genetic purity is really exclusive to progressive movements, whereas in conservative coded futures, like say Warhammer 40K, it's seen very positively, which I think shows where these two sides actually sit on this. Progressives worship humanity's weakness and stagnation, whereas most conservative groups want humanity to continue to improve. And the Federation has been shown to actively treat these people as second-class citizens and constantly be hunting for them. So they have strict controls of how you can have kids, who can have kids.
You can't genetically modify yourself in the Star Trek Federation?
Extremely. And they hunt down people who are.
What?
Even if it's not their choice and their parents did it. No, it is dystopian. But the worst part about all of this is we're also going to get into how this structure is controlled. Specifically, the military regulates replicators. And people can say, well, they need to replicate replicators because of the power use of replicators. But we will be showing actually the power use of replicators is largely minimum. So it appears that they are regulating access to replicators purely as a means of creating artificial scarcity to maintain economic control over the masses. I should note that this isn't just speculation, it's basically confirmed in universe. You can see this within Quark's bar, where he has replicators, but he still has to regularly import ingredients. The reason why he would need to import ingredients, which would almost certainly cost more energy to import ingredients to a deep space station than using a local replicator, which is just a simplified transporter transporting something in its memory buff. The only reason you would have that is if access to the replicators was restricted to create artificial scarcity. There is no way the energy economy needs of transporting food to a deep space station are less than just using a replicator. And I note here, if you are a fan and are going to say, well, some people say that replicated food doesn't taste as good as real food in universe. Yes, some people say that in the same way some people in our universe say that they don't like AI art as much as non-AI art, but when they don't know there's AI art, they like it more. Given that we know how replicators work, that they are just simplified transporters, no one in universe, if they really genuinely believed that the food that came out of a replicator tasted nothing like real food, would ever use a transporter. And yet we see the very people who make these claims using transporters regularly, because it would mean that whatever was coming out of the transporter wasn't the same as the thing that went into it. And keep in mind, it's not even like they treat the people well. We know from lower decks that while replicators can, for a trivial difference in terms of energy costs, replicate real food, lower status military members are forced to eat nutrition cubes. And they do not gain access to real food until they work their way up within the military hierarchy.
That makes sense, because even people at higher ranks talk about using their replicator credits for the week.
Yeah,
like
so
their
not a
rations.
post-scarcity society and a military dictatorship, and very evil, especially when contrasted with like the Ferengi, and we'll also contrast them with the government in Starship Troopers, which is just endlessly more ethical, more gender egalitarian, more everything.
Yeah.
So let's get started here. When I talk about the military as basically a interplanetary dictatorship, it's important to understand what the military controls in the Star Trek universe. Because when you begin to think about it, you're like, it is weird how rare it is to see anybody who's not in the military within Star Trek. And that is because within the Federation space, the military controls all exploration. So basically, they control what everyone knows exists and doesn't exist.
Right.
They control pretty much all negotiations. So in a country like ours, that would be controlled by the political class. You wouldn't send military commanders to handle the negotiation during a war. Not true in the Star Trek universe. They handle all interspecies negotiation, treaties, everything like that.
Good point. Yeah.
They handle all scientific research. It is shown that there are non-military scientific researchers, but they basically contribute nothing. We are aware of almost no major discoveries by them. And when they do have major discoveries, they are often confiscated. Take Data, for example, who is now basically owned by the military, and they even thought about dissecting him to mass replicate him. They are in charge of first contact, a very weird thing to put the military in charge of, but yes, they are in charge of colonization, which they do very aggressively. It's a very expansionistic empire, and they are in charge of law enforcement. And on top of all that, we will later explore that they are also above civilian law and legal system. Whenever it is shown that the military, even within a civilian context, like Kirk, we'll go into it, but it was on a dock, so it was not in a military context, ends up doing something that is illegal, and he is tried by a military and not a civilian court. That, when you're looking for dictatorships, is a very big sign that you're looking at a dictatorship.
Yeah.
So going into that, they also control the most prestigious academic institution in Federation space, Starfleet Academy. And it is an institution that has been shown to be extremely nepotistic for the children of people within the military. We'll go into instances of this, and also incredibly discriminatory to anyone without military connections. We will go into this as well. So it gives you sort of your status within society, but you don't get this if you're not doing the right. You're not saying the right shiblets, and you're not born into the right family. In terms of economic control of the military, keep in mind that they control all trade within Federation space, all planet-to-planet trade. That is an amazing amount for a military to control, as well as replicators, which is also really important because that is key to the way that trade works within this universe. They also control most labs, star bases, medical innovations, planetary logistics, etc. And civilian operations rarely operate independently on starships unless they are traitors, criminals, or fringe settlers. The civil government is incredibly weak. The Federation president is rarely mentioned and has almost no real authority in most episodes. Civilian institutions like the Federation Council are rarely shown making important decisions. Key constitutional decisions are done by military tribunals. We see this in the Drumhead and Measure of a Man. Then you have Section 31, and people will be like, well, Section 31 is framed as bad guys. If you're not familiar with them, they are a shadowy, extrajudicial Starfleet intelligence group. They have no democratic oversight, and they operate with impunity in Federation space. And they try to advance the Federation interests. They have tried to commit genocide before. They have done murders without trial before, etc. And you can be like, well, they're not officially condoned. And I'm like, actually, the official stance of the Starfleet is Section 31 doesn't exist. Now, given the copious evidence they do exist, to say they don't exist means we are covering for them and condone their continued existence. So they have a basically off the books group that can go around murder people and advance their interests, even to the point of committing genocide.
Wait,
continuing.
What show features this? Why?
They're in a few different shows. I don't remember all of them, but yeah.
Oh my gosh, I know there's so much. That's the problem, is there's just a lot of material here. I can see why. It's there's so much plausible deniability that, like, oh no, this must be ethical because it must be a utopia. I'm just missing something.
Yeah.
I actually was under the impression that there wasn't a separate government from the Federation. I thought the Federation was just the entire government, but you're saying there's
there is a separate like puppet government basically that has no real power.
Okay.
Which by the way, like strongly contrasts with something like Starship Troopers, where the military and the government are one, and you vote for who runs the military.
Exactly.
By Marshall.
Yes.
Which makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
And it breaks a lot of the nepotism things. There's not as much nepotism shown. There's not as much, but we'll get into all that later. Now you can be like, oh, well, civilian autonomy still exists. You have individuals like Joseph Sisko. The problem with Joseph Sisko is he is related to a high-level military commander, and we know that he operates a restaurant that uses real food, which suggests he doesn't have access to replicator technology or real food as a status symbol, but likely replicator technology. We'll get to why in a second. And we know that his access to military command is when he needed a heart operation, I believe it was, he used the military. Yeah, he received treatment for heart problems from Starfleet doctors, which implies that even as somebody who owned a restaurant and was of middle class, he would not have been able to afford this procedure without military connections, which again implies you do not have a lot of autonomy outside of this. And we repeatedly see when individuals outside the military are shown, and the way I've always interpreted the Star Trek shows is that is military propaganda within universe, because like when you see people outside of the military, you see like Picard's brother or something, right? But I mean, let's even take the case of Picard to get an understanding of what we mean by an intergenerational aristocratic class. So Earth is a post-scarcity world, right? But Picard owns a very large vineyard. And not just a very large vineyard, but it's a very large vineyard that is a family vineyard. So you don't just have wealth, you have intergenerational wealth.
Right. This is, I guess, proof that this is not a communist society, right? I mean, is there land ownership if you?
Yes. Well, I mean, we know there's land ownership because Picard owns a vineyard, unless it was allotted to him by the military, which we know it wasn't because it was inherited by his family. It's said to be a family vineyard. We know that there is an aristocratic, wealthy land-owning caste that owns large tracts of land and also ends up with high-level positions within the military at disproportionate rates.
Right.
Like there's no other reason that he should have this military position, and this is something we'll see over and over again as we go into the data. By the way, if you're wondering what a system like this is called, Sheldon Wallen would have called it inverted totalitarianism, or a statewide, where you have statewide democratic trappings exist, but the real power structure is opaque, unelected, and centralized. Here, Star Trek.
So because I was thinking this must just be a military dictatorship, but it's basically that, but everyone pretends it's not, right? That's, in other words.
Well, they're forced to pretend it's not. How much this disseminates outside the military is unknown, but we'll also go into instances in which people criticize the military and are harshly punished.
Okay, so it could be that people don't even realize it?
No, my read, as I've said, if it was that people didn't realize it in universe, we would have civilians saying, I live in a post-scarcity world and I love it. We don't have any civilians saying that in the entire this is a giant canon in the entire Star Trek canon.
Do we encounter many civilians?
Yes, you do sometimes encounter civilians.
Earth civilians.
But you wouldn't expect to, like I mentioned with Sisko and stuff like that, you wouldn't expect to be seeing many civilians if it was military propaganda, and if the military, from the perspective of the military, only their lives existed. Only their lives mattered. And I really like it as like telling on progressives. Remember, I go into Starship Troopers as telling on progressives where they think this is an attack on conservatives, but it actually shows a utopia. And, you know, gender egalitarian, no racism, everyone gets along, actual responsibility, not a lot of nepotism. Whereas if you look at their quote unquote utopia, which is Star Trek, which is what it's supposed to be, the progressive utopia, often really framed that way, you see what they really want, which is a world where they have total military control and no one else's life matters. That's really what it is.
Yeah, they call the shots on everything. Yeah.
And no one else is allowed to say anything, whether you're a great scientist or anything like that. It is just the military. They have control of who breeds, how they breed, etc. Let's go into that right now. The eugenics war in the aftermath.
Yeah, this I didn't pick up on at all. That's crazy.
So augments like Khan Noonan's Singh led to a devastating war on Earth in the 20th to the 21st century. The Federation response was a total ban on genetic engineering of humans outside of medical necessity. Now, I'd point out here that I don't actually, like, To me, it is unclear whether this war was justified because we have mostly the Federation's recounts of this war to go on.
Sure.
But for whatever reason, the first gene-altered humans were basically crazy and megalomaniacal. There is no reason a gene-altered human would be that way if you understand gene altering, because the things you would be altering, like IQ, typically correlate really strongly with prosociality. Like lower IQ is associated with higher degrees of rape. It's associated with higher degrees.
Yeah. So what we would expect is lower crime, lower violence, higher achievement, more helping people.
So we know this is the way science actually works. So we're looking at a world where the first gene-altered humans were basically crazy, megalomaniacal individuals who almost took over Earth. I read false flag operation because there's no reason that should have been the case.
That's fair.
If you understand science, it's almost as if they were trying to paint anyone who is gene altered as subhuman.
So wait, Khan is one of these people?
Yes.
Oh, I guess I never contextualized it that way. Oh,
and so the Federation.
So we're Team Khan. Oh,
well, not really, because I think Khan was a false flag operation of somebody who was basically gene altered to be crazy, and then. When you look at how crazy he is, he never could have gained the power that he gained. So, and then put in a position of power so that the Federation could crack down on this technology. The Federation response was a total ban on genetic engineering of humans. And what you see, the result of this in Deep Space Nine, Dr. Julian Bashir had to hide his childhood gene modifications to avoid expulsion from Starfleet. Even when he would have been treated as an underclass, not even allowed in Starfleet.
Do we know as viewers what the modifications were for?
Yes. In first grade, Julia Bashar showed great difficulty learning and below average height and weight for his age. So I'd note here the fact that he was dealt a bad hand of the dice by genetics and was slow and small for his age is a systemic form of unfairness within the Star Trek universe that the Federation works to maintain their existing power structure. They are maintaining systemic genetic inequality when they have the technology to address it. Shortly before his 7th birthday, his parents, Richard and Amashi Bashar, had him subjugated to genetic engineering. The procedure made him mentally superior to most humans and greatly enhanced his physical abilities. And we can also see from him that he is not evil. He is not, there's no reason that this is bad tech. You see, okay, maybe it made Khan evil back in the day. This guy's just like a generic, decent guy, right? So why is the technology still banned if it was able to help somebody like this? However, because of human genetic engineering had been declared illegal in the United Federations of Planets, except in cases concerning deaths and birth defects. So I'll note here, which is really interesting, is this shows the technology, when not implemented under this false flag ideology, even in universe, doesn't make people crazy. Bashir and his parents,
do it. They just really, really, really heavily regulate it, in other words.
Well, what I'm saying is they do it when they're saying if somebody's going to die otherwise, they will do it. But they do not allow it generically. But Bashar and his parents had to keep this procedure secret throughout most of his adult life. At the age of 15, he learned of what had been done and began using his first name, Julian, reasoning that the modifications had erased his original self from existence. What a crazy thing to believe. Sorry, I say this is a crazy thing to believe because if you're not familiar with genetics, the way your genes express themselves change as you age and throughout your life. It appears that the genetic modifications he had done were fairly modest, to the extent that other people couldn't tell that they had been done to him if they knew him before. So that he had this level of internalized racism against genetically modified individuals, that he saw himself as basically not the same human, shows the degree to which people who live under the Federation's tyranny are brainwashed into the dehumanization of people with genetic modifications. To save Bashir from losing Starfleet commission and medical license, Richard agrees to plead guilty to illegal genetic engineering and serve 2 years in prison. So his parents underwent 2 years in prison for this. And he was essentially being hunted, and he would have been kicked out of school if they had found out, something that he had no choice in. This is a world with a genetic underclass, which is shocking to me, and a genetic underclass with no logic behind it.
That is crazy. Wow.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes they highlight these things to show that they're bad, right? I mean, was this presented in a critical light, or was it presented in a light of, and this is why genetic engineering is evil?
Well, no, in Star Trek, genetic engineering is always only framed as evil because people who are genetically engineered go crazy, even though we know this isn't the case.
Well, but clearly this doctor was framed in a sympathetic light, given everything he had to go through.
The point is that is the reason for the laws. That is the universe's in-universe justification. That is Gene Roddenberry's explanation. He invented the character of Khan. This is not like a later addition or something like that. This is like OG material to the series. This isn't later they effed up the Federation and made them super racist. This is core to who the Federation is in the earliest renditions of this. And the justification is all gene-modified humans are evil. Even though we know that's not the case in universe.
Wow.
Basically, the reason why gene-modified humans aren't allowed in is because Starfleet is racist against gene-modified humans. Like, they believe that they are an intrinsically negative and bad thing. And you could say, well, maybe gene-modified humans have some advantage, and this could create some unfairness. But the problem is Data is allowed in, and he has unparalleled memory, strength, and more. Betazoids are allowed in, and they can read mind. Troy is an empath, giving her an advantage over other counselors. So it's not an issue that some people are born with abilities that other people don't have. The issue is just racism. All right, to continue. Starfleet as gatekeeper to ambition and purpose. Civilian scientists are marginalized. Almost all major scientific breakthroughs are shown as happening through Starfleet jurisdictions. Civilians or non-Starfleet experts are often portrayed as either rogue or reckless, scientists in Galaxy's Child or the Pegasus, or hopelessly outclassed by Starfleet solutions. Then you have the Relic Hunter arc from Lower Decks, which is an independent archaeologist, Petra Arbeen, arc reveals that Federation civilians who pursued independent careers in exploration and artifact discovery operate under heavy scrutiny, so they're basically under constant military surveillance, and they're portrayed as and thought of within the military as suspicious and possibly criminal. Specifically, you cannot easily rise in status outside of the military in this world. It does not even appear that you can earn wealth outside of the military in this world, which heavily contrasts with Starship Troopers. We know that Rico's parents are non-citizens, i.e. they never served in the military, and they are extremely wealthy. Just to be clear, so I'm not misunderstood here, I'm not saying there are not many counterexamples to this. I am saying there is literally none in all of Star Trek canon. There isn't a single example that shows that you, while living under Federation authority, can earn wealth and power outside of the military. If you want to see people who almost show this, you can look at like Joseph Sisko, but his son is a respected captain in the military, which could, under a military dictatorship, get him lots of abilities to skirt the rules. You have Vosh, but Vosh is a criminal and made wealth as a criminal. You have Loaxi Troy, but she's diplomatic aristocracy. She's Betazoid royalty, not Terran. Even when you see scientists and engineers, non-military civilians like Leah Brahms or Richard Daystorm are influential, but only through their service to Starfleet-related science. So this is unique to this world, is that there is likely, because it doesn't make sense how many Starfleet commanders are also wealthy, look at Picard, unless they have some control of the economic system and they're using it to their advantage. Or there's some sort of aristocratic class that keeps getting these roles.
Right.
Let's go to nepotism. Now, I already talked about Mariner and Freeman in Lower Decks, where Commander Freeman's own daughter, Ensign Mariner, was assigned to her ship, which you couldn't do in almost any military on Earth today. Even most like Banana Republic militaries wouldn't allow you to do that. This is pretty much exclusively something you would only see in a military dictatorship. And then you have Wesley Crusher in TNG. He was the son of Dr. Beverly Crusher. He was allowed on the bridge of a Federation ship without training. To be clear here, Picard is sleeping with Dr. Beverly Crusher, this kid's mom, who also is his subordinate, by the way, just throwing that out there. So in the Star Trek world, how do you ensure a good life for your kid? Well, you got to sleep with your captain. And he was later fast-tracked at the Starfleet Academy, where he's treated like a progeny because of Picard's patronage and mother's position. However, we see Nog, a Ferengi, is not allowed unless he is vouched for by a Federation member, despite how he does on tests or anything like that. Whereas elite families get fast-tracked due to this hereditary privilege we see.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to turn you down.
Turn me down? Why? Did I do something wrong?
It's not anything you did, Nog. You're just not Academy material. You couldn't handle the workload or the discipline.
That's not true. I'm a hard worker. I proved that to you.
It doesn't matter. I don't have time for this, Nog. Now, whatever little scheme you had, you can forget it. I'm not giving you that letter.
It's not a joke or a scheme. I want to join Starfleet. I want it more than anything I've ever wanted in my life.
You're a Ferengi.
You also see the military acting quite evilly. So let's talk about the Cardassian peace. So in the Federation Cardassian Treaty, signed in TNG Journey's End and expanded in DS9, they created a demilitarized zone. To secure peace, the Federation ceded inhabited Federation colonies to the Cardassian control. Colonists, humans, and Federation citizens were told to either relocate or live under Cardassian rule. Many refused to leave their home and became stateless people with no protection from their government. These were called the Maquis. The Cardassians routinely harassed and abused these colonists, resource denial, arrests, and even killings. The Federation did nothing to help the colonists adapt or leave. And I want to be clear here, it is not shown anywhere in canon that the Federation made an effort to attempt to resettle these colonists or move them to other planets. I mean, so much for post-scarcity Federation world. In a post-scarcity world, that should have been a trivial thing to do, and yet they just left these colonists to, the killing, raids, etc. In response, the civilians formed the Maquis, a military to defend themselves. And then what did the Federation do? They called this group, not in Federation territory, mind you, terrorists, and they attempted to hunt and imprison or kill them.
So they abandoned and then punished
the people for attempting to protect themselves from the new government.
After abandoning them without helping them out.
Exactly.
Oh. Surely this was framed in a light of the Federation is in the wrong here, no?
No, it's even worse than that. We can go into one of the people who this happened to, but one of them is later a recurring character on a show, and he was in this particular revolution.
Oh, like one of these citizens who'd been left behind.
And he is constantly harassed for this. He is denied promotion for this. It's treated as very much like you are an underclass because you went against the Federation. Even if you went against the Federation in a potentially just way, yeah, we hunt and we kill you. No disagreement. Even if you're not in Federation territory, even if you're just trying to defend yourself.
The only reason I've contacted you is to ask you to leave us alone. Our quarrel is with the Cardassians, not the Federation. Open your eyes, Captain. Why is the Federation so obsessed with the Maquis? We've never harmed you. And yet we're constantly arrested and charged with terrorism. Starships chase us through the Badlands, and our supporters are harassed and ridiculed. Why? Because we've left the Federation, and that's the one thing you can't accept.
And keep in mind that this is in spite of the fact that the Federation has Section 31 that they deny exists. Sorry, I should clarify. Through denying that a group that very, very, very obviously exists does not exist, they show that they are covering for this group and their complicity in the group's actions. So they allow potential genocide and extrajudicial killings if it helps them, but when there's a group that is diplomatically inconvenient for them, they attempt to eradicate them and genocide them. So again, I'm not pulling at straws here. This is core Star Trek lore, right? So
I'm never going to be able to watch Star Trek the same way again.
Wondering what Section 38 has attempted to do. They attempted to genocide the founders, the Dominion leaders, using a tailor-made virus. They attempted to manipulate Klingon politics to preserve Federation hegemony. And they conducted covert surveillance of Starfleet personnel without any form of oversight. Now, civilians are in the Federation, as we see repeatedly, generally second-class participants in society. If we look at the roles that they serve, they often either serve Starfleet directly, so they're not really civilians. This is like Kiko O'Brien, who's a school teacher. They're family members of Starfleet personnel, like Jake Sisko and Cassidy Yates, or they run bars or shops. This is Quark and Garrick, and they are constantly under Federation surveillance. They are constantly being shown as the Federation coming through, doing very aggressive checks, everything like that. Wow. So it's not like you have entrepreneurial autonomy within the Federation. If you look at, for example, Quark, he runs the most successful business on the DS9 colony, and he's constantly lectured, regulated, or threatened by Starfleet for one, running holosuites, which they basically imply as sex tourism.
That's fun.
Trading in gray and black markets, which is messed up because they have holosuites on Federation vessels, and we know that from episodes that they use them for romance type stuff too. Like
Totally.
there are episodes about that, and I think it's also confirmed in Lower Decks where they're like,
then give her worse jobs.
I've got her emptying out of the holodeck's filter.
Ugh, people really use it for that?
Oh yeah, it's mostly that.
Oh. Computer, load Mariner program all new to Olympic training facility. You might want to back up a bit.
Wow, this is a very detailed program.
And despite being essential to station morale, Quark is seen as morally suspect, not because he's evil, but because he's not aligned with Starfleet's perception, in an attempt to impose a perception that they are a post-economic society, basically, even though people are buying from Quark because apparently they don't have another way to get this stuff. Like, if they could just get what he's selling from replicators, given that we know that he makes some of it from replicators, they would be doing that. So why is replicator access so restricted?
That's a fair
More
point.
on that soon.
Well, because I saw one other YouTuber posit that there must be some universal UBI kind of based on energy use that can be applied to replicators. But
we can see that. Okay, so I'll just get into this right now. Okay, so we know how replicators work. They are considered a simpler form of teleportation. They use apparently the same technology. We can, from various episodes, begin to sort of calculate the energy needs of teleportation and replicators. We see teleportation is used without regulation almost constantly, right? But presumably it's far more expensive to use than replicators. But more than that, we see warp travel being used very regularly, and we know that warp travel is astronomically more expensive than replicators.
Sure.
So replicators, which are essentially a trivial expense, are highly regulated in their usage and regulated in ways that shouldn't really matter. Like a nutrition cube shouldn't cost a lot less to replicate than a equally nutritionally dense chicken or something, given that replicators are basically just teleporters. So the question is why are some people given artificially bad food within Starfleet?
Ooh, that's creepy. Yeah. This is fascinating.
Here. But yeah, so we're gonna go into Earth is infiltrated by shape-shifting Dominion founders capable of impersonating anyone, and a changeling bomb destroys a Federation facility, causing mass panic. Admiral Layton, a high-ranking Starfleet officer, believes the civilian government is too weak to respond. So what does he do? He stages a military coup. He falsifies evidence of mass changeling infiltration. He deploys Starfleet security across Earth as martial law, and he attempts to take over Starfleet command and remove the president of the Federation. He is only stopped by Captain Sisko, who uncovers the conspiracy. But what this reveals, very interestingly, is the Federation government is incredibly fragile. They basically have no power to resist this, and the only group that does have power to resist this is an individual within Starfleet itself, to maintain the charade of a civilian government. That Starfleet's upper command, and many of them, were willing to overthrow democracy in the name of quote-unquote security, was apparently little pushback. That ordinary citizens are thought of and treated like sheep by the higher people within Starfleet, that a single military officer's belief that democracy is insufficient was enough to cause the system to topple, and these are all things that are within the DNA of Starfleet. To go further, you have TNG, the Drumhead. This is season 4, episode 21. A Klingon exchange officer is suspected of sabotage aboard Enterprise. Admiral Nori Sarti is a retired but a legendary Starfleet investigator. So she is a Starfleet investigator that has been investigating for Starfleet so long that she has retired. So let's see what tactics she, a well-liked and known Starfleet investigator, ends up using. She quickly escalates the inquiry into a broad inquisition of traitors and sympathizers. She uses hearsay, ancestry, and ideology as evidence. She targets crew members simply for having a Romulan grandfather. She questions Captain Picard's loyalty due to past Borg assimilation and his defense of individual rights. Her witch hunts only stop when Picard turns her tactics against her. But what's important here is she is arresting people because of their ancestry. Okay, this is considered normal by somebody who was well liked by the Federation enough that she retired as a famous investigator.
Wow.
And these are the tactics that she used. No one had ever put in a complaint on her record. No one had ever said, oh, you shouldn't be doing this, which shows that Picard is unique in pushing back against this type of stuff. And this sort of dictatorship style system is normal, and this sort of McCarthyist court tribunals are normal within the Federation. And I actually think this is one of the most damning episodes of the entire Federation, in that you can't be like, oh, it's one of the shows that sometimes tried to show the Federation in a bad light, like DS9 or Lower Decks. This is like core TNG, right? Like, this is Picard, right? And what we see in no uncertain terms is that Picard's ship, for all its problems, for him hooking up with his subordinates and the extreme nepotism he shows, and being this rich guy who has a vineyard and all the privileges he gives himself through his military status, that he is the best of the best within Starfleet of this era, and that if this happened on any other ship, this would have been rewarded, because we know that she rose in status because she had been doing this over and over and over again. And so what we learn is that this woman's tactics are the norm throughout all of Starfleet, with Picard's ship, the ship that we are seeing, being the very best behaved ship, likely speaking, despite all of its problems, which I think shows the true dystopia of the Star Trek Federation.
Well, though this at least shows me that the writers are trying to frame these things as bad, because in so many of the Star Trek series, the captains struggle with the conflict between following Federation
rules. They frame it as bad in a lot of ways without making her a retired professional investigator for Starfleet. It's not like
but one of the big tensions of Star Trek, I mean, starting with the original series, was, Captain Kirk constantly breaking the rules and going against the Federation's wishes. So
I understand, but the point here being is the Federation itself is not, when Kirk goes against it, it's like, her to her, I'm against the bureaucracy. It's not like, this is a racist military dictatorship, when that's the reality. And within Kirk's time, a sexist one as well, which we'll talk more about in a second. Now, earlier I mentioned that members of the military dictatorship, i.e. of the military caste, are outside of civilian law. So let's dig into this more deeply. Court Martial, TOS, Season 1, Episode 20. Kirk is tried for negligence after a crewman's apparent death. This trial is a Starfleet tribunal and not a civilian court, even though the alleged crime occurred while at a starbase, a Federation facility. There is no indication that the civilian courts have justification over Starfleet officers. That's a huge red flag. Then you have the Menagerie, TOS Season 1, Episodes 11 to 12. Spock commits an act of mutiny by taking over the Enterprise to help his former captain. Again, he's tried exclusively by a Starfleet tribunal with no civilian oversight. Starfleet officers are only ever tried by military courts, even for crimes that might normally fall under civilian jurisdiction, e.g. manslaughter or mutiny. Starfleet, not civilian institution, is the final arbiter of justice for members of Starfleet. Now, I want to contrast them. Anything you want to say before I go further?
I just want to hear more. This is so changing the way I look at Star Trek.
So let's contrast Starfleet with the Ferengi, right? Who are often portrayed as the capitalist bad guys, which again, I think is the communists telling on themselves of how evil their utopia is, and how they are unable to portray even their worst enemies as really that bad. So the stated ethos, very similar to modern progressives, of Starfleet is for the betterment of all, and for the Ferengi Alliance, its profit is everything. But if you look at the actual ethos of Starfleet, it's service to a military hierarchy. And if you look at the actual ethos of the Ferengi, it's free market and contract law. If you look at the primary drivers of your role within society, it is only self-actualization via Starfleet. Within Starfleet, you do not appear to have status outside of a military command position.
Right.
And then wealth accumulation via trade. What's interesting here is the negatives that happen within society. So let's look at nepotism. You elites inherit privilege. In the Federation, yes, we see Wesley Mariner and Jake Picard's aristocracy. In Ferengi society, no. Children must earn profits to gain status. Can low-status citizens rise? Theoretically within Starfleet, but it appears to be heavily gatekept. Within Ferengi society, yes, anyone can become rich if they follow the rules of acquisition. Familial favoritism, ubiquitous and unacknowledged, but within Ferengi, it's explicitly discouraged. Even Quark and Rom fight for status and competition, and these are two brothers, right? So you do have a degree of caring about your family, but they fight amongst themselves to earn status within the society. And what's interesting is Ferengi society punishes failure and rewards competence regardless of background, whereas the Federation pretends it's meritocratic while advancing the children of officers and diplomats through unspoken patronage. Now, let's see the consequences of this. Let's see major wars, okay? Federation, you've got the Earth-Romulan War, you've got the Klingon War, you've got the Cardassian Dominion War, or the Cardassian and Dominion War, and then you've got the Borg. The Ferengi have no major wars that we're aware of. Attempted genocides. Yes, the Federation, you have Section 31 against the Founders. Ferengi, no genocides. And also, by the way, if you are under the misunderstanding that Ferengi are slavers, they are not. There is no confirmation in anything in Starfleet that Ferengis have ever owned slaves. And I was asking an AI, but like, would they, given what we know about them? And they're like, probably not. They would see it as economically inefficient, which is actually true of slavery if you look at Earth's military history.
Right.
Economic history. It hugely hurt the South's economy long term.
Look, I know the Cardassians can't be trusted. I know the Central Command would like nothing better than to destroy the Federation colonies in the demilitarized zone.
Then you agree with our position?
Not for a second.
Why not?
Because your position is illogical.
Do you propose to lecture me on logic?
It all comes down to the third rule of acquisition. The third rule clearly states, never spend more for an acquisition than you have to.
Logical?
You want to acquire peace. But how much are you willing to pay for it?
Whatever it costs.
That's the kind of irresponsible spending that causes so many business ventures to fail. You're forgetting the third rule. Right now, peace could be bought at a bargain price, and you don't even realize it.
You forget the weapons they already have.
They have weapons, you have weapons, everyone has weapons, but right now, no one has a clear advantage. So the price of peace is at an all-time low. Don't you get it? Attacking the Cardassians now will only escalate the conflict and make peace more expensive in the long run.
That's another episode. Espionage and regime change. Standard practice for the Federation. We see no instances of the Ferengi doing this. Military expansion. The Federation does this all the time. Expansion backed by armed vessels. In the Ferengi, no. We see no colonialism or expansionism. But what's I find really fascinating is the treatment of women. In Ferengi culture, women have no rights, they can't work, and they're not supposed to wear clothes.
I forgot that. Right.
Very chauvinistic culture. But what is interesting is that this is admitted within Ferengi culture, and it is something that they are working on.
I don't remember there being any effort to change that.
Oh, there's a huge plot point in DS9. Okay. And the culture is undergoing massive upheaval, and a lot of Ferengi don't like it, and it's... I love the line, like...
This is all Moogie's fault. He's been polluting Zek's mind with notions of equality and compassion. You can't even dump industrial waste anymore because it might harm the natural habitat. I'm supposed to start worrying about animals now. Look how they live. Wallowing in dirt, sleeping in trees. That's not natural. And don't even get me started about this whole labor rights thing. What have we come to if you can't demand sexual favors from the people in your employ? I just happen to have a contract right here. I read a report that over 40% of the population no longer believes that you have to buy your way into the divine treasury when you die.
You know, like...
Delightful.
But it's a society that has problems but is working on them. What is interesting about women in the Federation is they are a systemically discriminated underclass, but there is no feminist movement within the Federation or acknowledgement of women's problems within the Federation, which shows that there is no goal to fix it, unlike within Ferengi culture. So while the Federation brags about gender equality, it mostly just uses female characters as caregivers, Dr. Crusher, Kieko, victims, Tori's constant assaults, or sidelines, Tahasha Yar, Ensign Ro, or Kira's late stage arc.
Was Tahasha Yar the badass bodyguard who died?
I don't remember. Law and Justice.
Because she was really badass. She
in
could
what
kick
series?
and punch. The blonde woman with the short hair who does die. Yeah, Tasha Yar. No, she's badass. That's what I was thinking, like, maybe this isn't true. Because I was thinking at first of the empath who I grew up with. Like, that was, what was that, The Next Generation? Who, like, was way too, like, I'm here to talk about how people are feeling.
This is pointing out that in her late stage arc, she was sidelined.
Right, but, and I guess Lieutenant Yar was just killed. She just killed off. I don't know if that's more
continue.
about the society or if it's about the writers, though.
Well, Simone, the writers create the society. Like, in the same way that the writers didn't mean for the world of Starship Troopers to actually be a techno-utopia, they created it by accident. The writers of Star Trek didn't mean to create a sexist, racist dystopian, but that is what they created if you actually read the works
like
and
the
read
women walking around in their little mini skirts.
Implications of them. Yes, it's like, oh, we created a gender egalitarian utopia, but then all the women are in like caregiver roles or unimportant, and it's like, wait a second, why are there so few women commanders? Why are there so few? Like, if this is actually gender egalitarian in the way you say it is, why is it structured this way? And the only explanation is that everyone's being forced to lie based on some sort of like military dictatorship and not talk about it. To talk about what I mean here, look at the sexualized uniforms, particularly in TOS and TNG. Female officers were forced to wear miniskirts, sometimes paired with high heels, and they are often referred to by their appearance and not their rank. So while males, it'll say by rank or whatever, they'll be like, you is the long hair or whatever. In TNG season 1, some female crew members are seen as in scant uniforms, short dresses with bare legs, while men never are. Even in series like Voyager, 7 of 9 is forced to wear a skin-tight catsuit with visible seams outlining her breasts and genitals. So like, but this isn't Starfleet, but again, this is like what we're seeing within the show.
That's true.
Which shows the sexism of the writers. This demonstrates
and market dynamics be market dynamics, you know. I mean, it's a TV show, but
it demonstrates an underlying cultural expectation that women in Starfleet present as physically appealing. Well, you can say that, but like we know from Conan that like physically appealing men are also sell well, but Starfleet doesn't have those. So you can't
that
say
is
it's
true.
market dynamics. And then let's talk about power dynamics and harassment by commanding officers. In TNG, The Naked Now, Data and Shar Yar have sex while under the influence of mind-altering substance, a clear violation of consent norms brushed off without consequence. Kirk routinely engages in flirtation and seduction with female officers, subordinates, and alien women, never facing disciplinary action. In fact, it's never even brought up, despite being grossly illegal within
what about
any
his second in command, the guy with the like goatee and the dark hair? He's the one who slept around more. He was the man-slut of.
So you're thinking Riker. Riker was shown as hitting on women across ranks and alien species while technically being in command over them.
Yeah. No, he like really abused his position.
He would be in jail in the U.S. military.
Riker he would be canceled so hard.
Not canceled. What they're doing is illegal. They are forcing their subordinates to deal with their very aggressive sexual advances. Like, this is not okay. Broadly speaking, this is a military dictatorship, even within current Earth structures of government. Like, you would not be allowed to, again, act this way in most developing countries' militaries. Speaking of the type of unprofessionalism we would only expect from a military oligarchy, can we talk for a second about how most of the ships in the Federation have fully stocked bars within them? These are military ships. That is not normal. That is the type of thing you would only expect from the type of military where I guess the military also runs the government, and where the commanders are just like, well, I just need to go to a bar during the day, during a work day, which they do regularly. Many women in the Federation, okay, we already talked about this, not having like real roles, like they're doctors, Crusher, Picard, Barsari's Norris.
I mean, Dr. Crusher was
women,
great.
Caregivers or emotional supports like Tori, Kesser, Ezra. Combat, engineering, and command are far more frequently occupied by men. And
that's true. That is true. I mean, like I keep trying to defend with just Dr. Crusher and Tasha Yar, but at the same time, when I think about Starship
Troopers, she's a caregiver.
Starship Troopers and like the women and like there's just no distinction. It's just wherever your merit goes, that's where you're going to be.
You specifically requested transfer from Fort Cronkite to this training unit?
Sir, I heard it was the best, sir.
It is the best. But what makes you think you're good enough?
Now that's the kind of gal who makes squad leader.
Yeah, women are in the military at the same rate as men. Women shower with men. Women have there's no distinction between them in Starship Troopers.
Yeah.
And what's interesting as well is while there is an instance where somebody uses his like dates a subordinate, he explicitly walks around it. So if you remember the female character who is dating Rico at the beginning and then ends up dating the guy in the Starfleet, their version of Starfleet, the fleet it's called. When he's training her, he flirts with her and he mentions like, you know, flirting with a senior commander, like that's a, you know, something you're going to need to get approval for. So it's applied that like you're allowed to do it, but it's something that is to some degree monitored and that he sees as like it's clear that he's a little uncomfortable with it at first. So it is allowed, but it has to happen through sanctioned roles. This is not true within Starfleet. But what is more important than all of this is despite the sexism that is at the heart of Star Trek's world, there is no feminist movement shown in Federation society. There doesn't even seem to be tolerance for a feminist movement. There is no structural reforms. There is no acknowledgement of power imbalance or ever an acknowledgement of sexual misconduct, as far as I'm aware. And there are no cultural institutions to address this. There doesn't even appear to be somebody you can bring to, hey, Riker's been really flirty with that subordinate. That does not appear okay. Now, contrast this with the Ferengi, who, while they have open sexism, there is a clear feminist resistance. And they show legal and cultural structural change over time. But now I want to talk about the replicator thing because this really got me. Okay, so Starfleet gets guaranteed access to replicators, quarters, medical care, travel, and holodeck if you're a senior person. A replicator use is frequently described as being rationed or restricted on ships and colonies. So this some form of internal currency or point system exists, not public, for using the replicators. Access is centralized and controlled, not truly post-scarcity, and civilians likely do not have replicator access. Canon examples. DS9 during the Dominion War, replicator use is rationed. Voyager, energy for replicators is limited and prioritized by command. Lower Decks suggests that even junior officers and Starfleet have less access to perks than command-level officers. Federation credits, a shadow economy. Canon references to Federation credits include buying passage, encounter at Fairpoint, gambling, the Royale, and dealings with outside cultures. Quark accepts them. Yet, they are never shown in use by ordinary Federation civilians on Earth. This suggests like civilians never talk about earning credits. Only Starfleet personnel get to use them, which suggests some sort of like separate economy that is unique to this military cast of individuals within Earth.
Well, yeah, one person was positing that Federation credits must be used for like really big purchases, like shipbuilding has been described in Federation credits terms, and then with trade with other species, but not something used internally within the Federation. But people were instead given like energy associated rations that were most likely seen to be associated with replicator use, but you're finding no evidence that civilians have access.
I'm seeing instead some individuals appear to have Federation credits to their name, which implies that Federation credits are something that Federation officers grift. Now, if it's not something that you're supposed to have as an individual, somehow they end up gaining access to them, which again implies a corrupted system.
Yeah, that's a little suspicious.
And it's also interesting that they wouldn't use gold press latinum. By the way, if you're wondering why latinum is often used in the Star Trek universe, it is because it cannot be made by replicators, which again implies that replicators are not that hard to use if it completely destabilizes the economy of all other things.
Sure.
So Federation, it seems to run on a dual economy: resource allocation internally, rations, replicator access, credits for external use, and limited perks. This resembles a command economy layered on top of a military benefit structure, not a free market or UBI model, as some people attempt to argue they have. Another really interesting point here before we get to the more on the way the replicators work, there is apparently a lack of a civilian media, press, or dissent. There's almost no mention of independent journalism or critical public media. Jake Sisko tries to become a war reporter and is pressured to self-censor by the Federation military. The Federation has no visible elections, civil forums, or debates about policy in most series.
Yikes.
Voyager, no oversight of Janeway's command, despite life or death stakes for an entire mixed crew. Colonization equals Federation expansionism. The Federation claims to respect non-interference, prime directive, but it settles new worlds with abandon, brings in new species and absorbs them into its economic and legal framework, and refuses to let members leave without major political crises, e.g. Bajor's negotiations and the Marquise territories.
No, I mean.
So it's like very urban monoculture. It tries to bring people in, but you can't leave, and you need to follow their cultural norms once you're in.
Diversity victims, like you say. Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Now, an interesting thing is this isn't even a particularly like beneficial, or what I'm saying, benevolent system to live in. So you can look at Regional Barclay, who's in TNG and Voyager. He's a non-neurotypical officer.
What does that mean? You mean he's autistic?
Yeah, he's coded as neurodivergent. So social anxiety, speech hesitancy, avoidant coping mechanisms, and obsessive behavior, holodeck addiction. How he's treated.
It's holodeck addiction.
So he's named Broccolini by Riker and LaForge, condoning it. And note here that Riker is the one who constantly sexually harasses people and yet has a position of power.
Yeah.
His competence is doubted despite clear technical genius. He saves the ship multiple times. He is pressured to normalize his behavior to fit in with the crew. He's constantly under informal surveillance by his peers and superiors. When he's later involved with the Pathfinder project in Voyager, his mental health struggles are used as a reason to distrust him even when he's right. Now, let's talk about how racist the system is. So we'll talk about Nog from DS9, who is a Ferengi. He is not allowed to apply to the Starfleet Academy, which, remember, is a key access point to this military command structure, which I think shows not a meritocracy at all.
Yeah.
He must be sponsored by a Starfleet command officer, Cisco. Cisco initially refuses, assuming Nog is making a joke. He must go through multiple tests of character to be proven as worthy. Once he admitted, he's treated with suspicion by some and must overperform to earn respect. He faces severe trauma in the siege of AR-558 and loses a leg, which becomes a major character arc, improving his loyalty. The problem is that we know that you have like Wellesley Crusher, who just gets in based on nothing and gets fast-tracked because
he's a whiz kid, Malcolm. Give him a break.
Because his parents are in the Federation. But you constantly see this. Now, if we're going to contrast this with the Starship Troopers, in the Star Trek Federation, voting rights, universal, but the civic institutions seem to have no power, limited to veterans. And this is important, by the way. Active military members cannot vote in Starship Troopers. You have to...
you have to finish your military service to get the right to vote and to have kids.
And this is also never said within the show, but being a civilian and getting the right to vote does not actually mean joining the military. If you're a pacifist, you can do it as well. If you're severely injured or severely retarded, you can still do it.
Rico's parents were really against his military service, like the kind of main protagonist. And yet, and he was kind of rich and could have been a private citizen Nepo baby in that world. However, does that mean one of his parents had to have served or both to have been able to have him as a kid?
No, you do not need, it's actually said very explicitly within the show, you do not need military service to have a license to have a kid. It makes it easier to do the application.
Like you're more likely, or you bypass a lottery, perhaps?
No, it's likely that you otherwise need to prove competence or utility, which is why Rico's parents were able to have kids because they're rich and successful.
Okay.
I.e., it's a sane society. Sorry, I don't want to be...
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, they're producing not net drains on social services, but rather children who are likely to be high taxpayers. And Rico, being a Nepo baby private citizen, would have been a high taxpayer.
Exactly.
Okay.
Military control, de facto control by Starfleet. The military does not have direct control over civilians in Starship Troopers, and actually civilians are critical of the military and media. You do see media propaganda within it, but you see a lot of citizens who are critical of the military in the Starship Troopers universe, which suggests a critical independent media. Which you do not have in the Starship Troopers universe. Political participation.
You mean which you do not have in the Star Trek universe?
Star Trek universe. Almost zero political participation, whereas in Starship Troopers, you have a clear civil contract, service equals voice. And remember, service does not have to be military service. That is implied in the movie, but it's never said in the movie. So I'm going to default to book rules, which is if you are a pacifist or you have some major injury or you have some major retardation, they give you like civil work. So no, you don't have to be in the military. It just means you have to make
and also coming from a family of wealth doesn't mean that you get promoted to some high or cush position, because Rico, again, the rich Nepo baby, gets put on like the front lines of ground troops
Yeah,
Other students who clearly weren't as wealthy got
high levels of position because they're competent.
Yeah.
Also consider how dissent and protest are treated in the two universes. In Star Trek Federation, if you look at like the Marquis, you are actively hunted and murdered for dissenting.
The guy in the wheelchair who gets hanged.
That is because he was an anti-war terrorist. Which
right. No, he committed acts of terror, right?
Yeah, through protesting the war. Which is an act of terror when it's a war to save our species. First of all, come on, you've got to have a degree of patriotism for the planet, Simone.
Bowing to a rising popularity all across the Federation, Sky Marshal Fid declares that while religion is acceptable, peace is not.
But even when leftists are trying to paint them as evil, I looked at this guy who they hanged and I was like, thank God they hanged that guy. He seemed like a real douche canoe.
In related news, peace terrorist Elmo Gonif and 51 of his closest friends were hung this morning.
But they can't silence you! The Federation and all of you! You will not take my voice! You will not take me! You will not take away our power! You all! You! You all! The Federation!
Wait, are you saying he didn't actually commit a violent act of terrorism and he
probably
really just...
not. But what you see is when the form of terrorism that's being committed is not going to lead potentially to the extinction of humanity, it is allowed within the Federation. We know this because of the radical Mormon separatists who settled in bug space and ended up instigating the entire war. We know this because they were not hunted down and they were not murdered as they might have been within Federation territory for disagreeing outside of, like the Marquis, outside of Federation territory with Federation command and ideals. So we know that they were allowed to do that, which shows that only sort of direct challenging is what's dealt with. And I'd also note that it does mention that was the most mass executions in a day since the 21st century.
In what many believe to be the all-time record for executions in a single day since the 21st century.
Which means that they were not used to executing that many people. So, it shows that they... And I'd also point out to you, Simone, that they were much more thorough in how they handled it. Like the Federation, they go out, they attack these people who basically have no reason to be attacked. They're just trying to defend themselves. And in the Starship Troopers, we learn that this terrorist, they dealt with his friends and family as well, which was his closest friends and family, as they say, which ensures that this kind of dissent doesn't spread throughout the Federation.
So you're saying at least... In the Starship Troopers universe, they finish what they start.
They handle it, yeah. Citizenship and autonomy. In Star Trek, it's implied but vacuous. Dual tier was in Starship Troopers, but there doesn't appear to be that many restrictions on non-citizens. Path to political power, opaque, elite, nurtured, Starfleet, academia is for Star Trek. And again, that's why the leftists like it so much. It's a world that is ruled by what they see as the educated elite. But within Starship Troopers, it's a pathway that's open to all through contribution. And note here, there are no cases that I'm aware of wealthy civilians in the Federation, whereas you do see this in Starship Troopers. And wealth outside the military is rare and aristocratic, like Picard's Vineyard. It's explicitly allowed within Starship Troopers, which also think about female leadership. In Star Trek, it's mostly tokenized, whereas in Starship Troopers, it is competent and respected, like Dizzy and Ibanez.
And there's a female Sky Marshal in the second one, right?
She's in the first, Sky Marshal Tahat Maru, the person who runs all of society. It's a Black African woman who won via an open election when somebody else wasn't doing a good job. We do not see Federation members replaced often when they don't do a good job. And yet this is seen repeatedly in Starship Troopers. People who do bad jobs are fired despite what connections they have. Now, let's talk about replicators and power demands. Warp drives versus replication. Warp cores generate massive power outputs capable of bending space-time. Holodecks use transporter and force field to render real-time multisensory environment. Transporters disassemble and reassemble matter at a quantum resolution. These technologies use vastly more energy and are vastly more complex than replicators, which we know are simplified transporters. That's how the technology works. They basically have a template of like what you would want to transport, and they just replicate that template over and over again. If power consumption was really the issue, we would see things like holodeck and warp travel be more limited in their use. And yet we see no rationing, which implies that the rationing is used to create fake scarcity. An interesting thing with replicators is Quark's bar and replicator tokens. So Quark's bar uses replicators at his bar, but not for free. He must pay for use using tokens of some kind. And to me, this implies some kind of limiting mechanism, because we know that Deep Space Nine is powered by I forget what it is, some kind of fusion reactor, but it certainly wouldn't be having issues with replicators in a bar. So, and this is to the extent where he has to import ingredients to make his food, which to me implies shenanigans, if I'm going to be honest.
Or at least false scarcity, at the very least.
Sorry, for those who fail to follow my logic here, transporting food to a deep space station definitely costs more energy multiplicatively than using a replicator to create that food at the space station, given how replicators work. What this almost certainly means is that the replicators are being regulated to create false scarcity.
At least.
Now, the final big scary thing about the universe is the total absence of AI, or near total absence of AI.
Well, what about the shipwide computers? Come on, they're constantly talking to computer.
But they're not sentient, and they're not even as capable as like GPT or something.
Well, there's
like that.
data. He's self-aware. He
was made independent from the Federation by Dr. Sung. So we'll get into this. So there is a near total absence of AI, yet they have near magical computing systems, quantum level data processing, warp drives, replicators, and transporters. And yet there's no evidence of Starfleet ships with AGI co-pilots, civilian access to general AI assistance, or AI-run governments, courts, or research institutes. Keep in mind, that's one of the first things I would suggest most societies will implement with AI is AI courts. I would trust an AI to judge me in court. Peers, I'm very the monarch when they're like judged by a trial of your peers.
It's a trial by jury, and it's up to your peers to decide.
Peers! How dare you! That repulsive display of humanity out there? No way!
Yeah, no thanks.
These people are not my peers. But voice interfaces like Larkos, we see they are smart but not sentient. They know AI rights discourse outside of data, and no widespread AI usage for command diplomacy or logistics. Clues as to why it may be outlawed and restricted. And keep in mind that these outlaw and restriction is kept from the average citizen because they appear to not know why when they're talking to data, right? Like they appear to think this is a new technology, which is also shocking to me. Oh, this guy programmed this AI out of nowhere with no understanding of how AI works. No, what it appears is he probably had a vast understanding of how AI worked, and he used that to program data and his brother. But anyway.
That's interesting.
TNG measure of a man. Starfleet considered deconstructing data to mass produce him. This is presented as a new dangerous frontier. The legal status of AI is undefined, and it is property by default. Dr. Song's backstory, TNG plus Picard. Nguyen Song worked in isolation and off the grid. His work was not sanctioned by Starfleet or the Federation. In later episodes, Picard, it is revealed that synths are banned after the Mars attack, solidifying the legal precedent. So we actually know from the series that synthetic humanoids were banned a long time ago in Earth's history during the Mars attacks, which explains why data had to be made off the grid and why you don't see AIs. It also explains why on early ships, like in Voyager, what they use for processing is bioneural gel packs instead of electronics, because they're trying to get away from synthetic AI because it is likely illegal, but it is likely secret that it is illegal, and a lot of people do not know that anyone has the capability to make it. That's my only guess. It exists within our technological timeline, is that AI was made illegal by the government in the same way that they made genetically modified humans illegal, likely afraid of anything that could disrupt their existing power structure. And it's worse than that. The ship basically goes around and attempts to murder any smart AIs they find. So if you look at Return of Archons, this is System Londeron, a planet AI created by a long dead prophet. A planetary AI created by a long dead prophet named Londeron. It remains peace and order through psychological conditioning, cultural programming, and absorbing dissenters into conformity. Society is non-violent, serene, and orderly, but stagnant and uniform. Not that different from a lot of Starfleet stuff, but okay. Periodic festivals purge chaotic behavior and allow for catharsis. What does Kirk do? He confronts Londoran. He uses logic, quote unquote logic, to prove that the AI is harming its people by denying growth and freedom. And then he overloads and destroys Londoran, murdering it. There's no systematic violence or exploitation shown. People are healthy, clothed, housed, and peaceful, and they appear to be consenting to this. The system was benevolent and totalitarian, unlike Starfleet, which is just totalitarian. So I would read this as he has an order to go out and murder AIs. I mean, clearly this is against the Prime Directive. Why was he not punished for this? Let's go to the next one. The Apple. TOS, Season 2, Episode 5. The system, Val, a massive subterranean computer is worshipped as a god. It maintains Indic society. People do not age or die naturally. They do not have sex or reproduction to keep I mean, obviously, if no one's dying, you need to maintain population levels.
That makes sense, yeah.
And they have complete social harmony and protection from harm. Val is fed by villagers who serve it and live in total material comfort. So what does Kirk do? He destroys Val.
What?
And he leaves them suddenly mortal. So now everyone on the planet can die now, unprotected and culturally unprepared for what happens next. Was Val abusive? No, the people were happy, healthy, and never knew war, disease, or death. Kirk imposes his ideology that it's wrong to prevent sexual autonomy and intellectual progress. So basically saying, I want to have sex with these aliens.
Oh my gosh.
How dare you?
So the one thing was just that they weren't banging, and so
yeah, no,
that's
I mean,
classic Kirk. That is very. I couldn't bring myself to watch all of the originals.
Read is if I was trying to read between the lines, is a lot of Starfleet has command to go out and look for intelligent AIs and kill it. And I think
so. This is the secret, real reason
that they're going to plan. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if they do have a few secret objectives, given that we know that Starfleet is basically lying to the citizenry about some stuff just from what we're going through right now, lying about their ability.
It also explain though why Kirk is able to get away with so much. Oh, Kirk, why did you do that? Slap on the hand.
Oh, you murdered their god. Whoopsie. Guess they're going to have to figure that out. But it makes a lot of sense if you view it as a military dictatorship that's attempting to avoid anything that could challenge its authority. So yes, very dystopian society, very evil society. And I like it because it portrays who the progressives really are at their core. They say they want gender equality. What they really want is women in miniskirts that they can sexually harass all the time. And keep in mind, there are far more sexual harassment scandals by Democratic politicians than there are Republican politicians. They are far more likely to, and this is because that's what they want. They want to gain power so that they can harass people. Or, in Biden's case, sniff their hair.
I was waiting for Joe and just staring at his desk when I decided I'd have a little look-see inside the drawers. Uh-oh, I think I might know where this is going. I opened one, then another, and inside every drawer, every single one, piles of human hair. For the first time in my life, I felt like I understood a president. As I was sorting through the hair, admiring the collection, in walked the man himself. There was no hiding what I had done, so I just put the hair back, shut the drawers, nodded my head, and said, Mr. President.
Hey, if he didn't want someone finding his hair collection, he should have locked his drawers.
We all have a desire to be known, and he's constantly sniffing hair in public. It's not some big secret.
No, imagine if you saw Kirk sniffing people's hair the way Biden does, like subordinates or little girls. If you saw that on a show, you'd be like, oh, he's clearly the villain. Like, why is anyone okay with this? But it's worse than that, because you also see that what they want is a world under their military control, where anyone who doesn't agree with their ideology is silenced, where there's no free press, where there isn't actual post-scarcity. It's post-scarcity for them at the top and nutrition cubes for their grunts. And then for your average person, who knows how bad it is, because we just don't see them in Star Trek.
Well, so it kind of is a progressive utopia. It's just a conservative dystopia.
It is a progressive utopia. in what they really want instead of what they're telling you they want.
Right.
It is gay space communism. And it shows how evil gay space communism is fundamentally. Whereas gay space fascism, which you have in Starship Troopers, is a world with gender equality.
Well, but it's not
a world with voting.
Because there is private property. There is an underclass.
Well, we don't know if private property functions the way it does in our world. I mean, we know that Picard, Major General, is able to inherit lots of land. Would the average citizen of the Federation be able to? Maybe not, given some of the stuff we've heard. I mean, if they are saying, well, we are communist in some ways, what they must mean is, well, top military commanders can own property. Their family gets some special privileges. But the average citizen, I mean, it's almost implied there must be a caste system. So I don't buy that. And I see the movies as, and you can say, why do I see the movies and shows as designed as in-world military propaganda? Because why else do we see almost no civilians? Why are we never shown the way the average person lives?
It's weird. I don't know. Growing up watching it as a kid, I was left under the impression that that was the only world there was, that there is no civilian life in this world.
Well, because they don't see civilians as humans fundamentally.
Well, but I just assumed there weren't civilians, that everyone
right. Well, and that's why you weren't aware of them. That's why you thought that, right? Like, but clearly there are, right? Which is just so contrasting with Starship Troopers, right?
Yeah.
Like,
there's clearly a rich civilian life.
Well, and everyone
doesn't necessarily love the military. Absolutely.
One of the things that I find so interesting about, if you view it as military propaganda, is you can watch shows where like Wesley Crusher will like see a planet where there's like capitalism or racism, and he'll be like, oh my gosh, did we used to have this on Earth? It's so weird to think that they could still live this way and that we ever could have done this. And here I am like, hey buddy, why do you think this doesn't exist on Earth? You're trained on Federation manuals. Those are military manuals made by a group that we already know is willing to lie and murder people. Like, why do you, because this is propaganda, right? Like, it's an organization that we know treats a number of humans as the genetic underclass and actively hunts them. Like, what do you mean? Oh, it's so weird that they're racist just because they look a little different. Mm-hmm. It's like your government is racist and you're even aware of that particular part of their racism. You just don't contextualize those people as human. It really reminds me of the modern left, where they're like, well, the Nazis did all these racist things where they treated some people of certain ethnic groups and sexualities as sort of an underclass. And then I'm like, well, you do the same thing.
I never thought of that, but my
those
God.
people aren't really human is basically what they think. And I go, that's what the Nazis thought of the Jews. Like, the moment you contextualize a group as not fully human and you have the right to do that, the moment you think you have the right to say, oh, racism only happens when this group does it to this group and not when this group does it to this group, because you're like, well, power and privilege, but you are the one who justifies power and privilege. The Nazis thought, if you're using the power and privilege argument, that Jews had power and privilege over them. You're aware of that, right? Like, they didn't say, oh, the Jews are idiots, or no, they said this is a group with systemic power and privilege, and that's why they must be put down, which is exactly what you're doing. The exact mechanism you use to dehumanize people. And it's the mechanism that is likely used within the Star Trek universe as well. And it's why we need to fight for space gay fascism.
Space fascism for the win.
Because the reality is that space gay fascism or Starship Troopers isn't actually fascism. It's a real democracy. Whereas space gay communism is actually a military dictatorship under a fascist rule.
Well, yeah, the key lesson is look at what is done, not what is said, right?
Exactly. All right, love you to death. Hopefully I ruined Star Trek for all of you.
I will never look at it the same again. But I'll still love it.
All right, do you want to do one of your pieces or one of mine?
That's crazy. Oh, but anyway, so I was watching this YouTube video. It's just a short 5-minute video of a woman who is married and in her 40s and childless, and trying to explain the reality of what it's like to be childless as a woman in your 40s. And she's talking about how she feels invisible and how vis-a-vis her friends who are parents, it's always, you know, they take precedent. You know, she has to work around their schedules because they have to drop their kids off for a doctor's appointment or pick them up.
I was saying that they do. Like, is she denying that they have more restrictions on their time than her?
She's aware of it, but what's crazier to me, and I guess this is something that's pervasive around many people who have gripes and personal gripes, is that that's also the parents themselves being invisible. That's the parents themselves having to put their needs after that of their children. Yeah. Like, this isn't even like, she gives off this impression like the parents are getting all the attention. The parents are the ones who are validated, when really it's the parents putting their children first because they have other lives that they're responsible for.
She wants the attention, and she can't stand that anyone has attention other than her, is what it sounds like.
Yeah, I think a lot of it's like with the kids. It's maybe she's resentful of the kids more than the parents, that these kids get attention. It's like your father saying, like, why should I bother coming over for Christmas? It's all about the kids anyway.
And it's like, it is all about the kids. Thank you. Thank you for understanding that. It is not about you, old person.
It is not. And I think maybe that's a more universal problem that childless people have.
No, I think it's childless people of that generation that, you know.
Maybe. Yeah, because I think and she also highlights that, like, oh, people shame me for the free time I have, that, you know, I choose to plan a cruise because I have free time, which like, we booked our entire week-long cruise in like 2 hours and then did absolutely nothing else. There's
for way more people than her. Like,
and there's no such thing as planning a cruise. Like, we literally bought with points our cruise in fewer than 2 hours. And that was after like a lot of like finagling to try to figure out how to fit 6 people in a room.
You know, these people very much do nothing with their lives, and they expand the simplest of tasks into the longest of time periods.
But she acts as though she's being criticized for that. When any of our single friends talk about their single friend activities, I respond with enthusiasm and praise because it sounds like fun stuff for the most part. Like, I don't get where these
not
people
really.
Feel like
I mean, personally, you may do that in public, but you're like, what a waste of life their life is.
I don't know. We have some friends who do like glamorous stuff that I love living vicariously through, and I think that that's great, and it's great for them. But, you know, like, so I'm not judging them, and I never felt judged ever as someone who was very public and open about never wanting to have kids. Never. I only felt celebrated for that. So I don't know where people are getting this judgment. But anyway, rant over. We can get started. I had to sit because I just watched it and was like, how is this woman not aware of the profundity of her selfishness, that like other people are putting other humans ahead of themselves and she's criticizing them for it because they're not putting her first, because they're not adoring her.
All right.
Is that the coolest thing? Do you really like it, Toasty?
Yeah.
How do you turn the green one off? Oh, with the magic key.
Yeah, you put the key in the keyhole, then the white, then the green one will turn off.
Ta-da! You did it. Good job.
Now when we turn off the lights, back on. I'm almost done.
Good job. Oof. It's a lot of lights and a lot of buttons and toggles and switches. Oh. Look at that. All right.
Turn all of the lights off.
Turn all of them off, yeah? That looks pretty good. And what do you think, Titan? Are you sleepy? You're looking at me like I'm crazy. You want some milk? Yeah. I'll bring you some milk. Yeah. You sleepy?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna bring you some milk.
Mommy, I turned it off.
You turned it on? Oh, all off, and now you're saving batteries, right, buddy?
Now I'll turn all of the batteries back on.
Okay, I'm gonna get Titan some milk. I love you guys.